name is Hieber. I am a second year in the program here at CSB. And today we'll be on category genesis through schematicity. I'll be talking about the origin of a class of words called preverbs in Chitimacha. So the Chitimacha language is spoken in southern Louisiana. It's spoken in the region of a number of isolates. It is itself an isolate, unrelated to any language that we know of. And it was last spoken by these two people who I've come to know very well through their stories that they were recorded by Morris Swadesh from 1930 to 1934. They were the last two speakers, the last two native speakers of the language. But thanks to their work with Morris Swadesh and John Swanton, we have 120 stories that they told us and recorded. And so we're working with those archival materials to work with the Chitimacha tribe today in this really pretty neat revitalization program. And so we're trying to figure out all sorts of aspects of the grammar as we go. They've got a revitalization program in the school. They have a Rosetta Stone software that they're using. So they're doing some really great work. And Chitimacha has a class of words, like I said, called preverbs. So there's 9 of them, maybe. And so as you can see, they tend to express things like directionals, like going or returning there. They also have some grammatical functions, like intransitivizing usage or anomalizing usage. Some of them are even like reversative. And they're all, monosyllabic, short little words. The preverbs, they go in front of a verb, and they tend to form a semantic unit with the verb. So they're often lexicalized, and I'll show some examples of that in just a moment. And like I said, they add directional and often aspectual meanings to the verb. They come in plain and reversive pairs. So you get he and keeps, kop and kops, kos and ka, etc. And they have different origins. Almost all of them have a slightly different origin from each other. It's not like they all came from the same type of thing. Some are from verbs, some are maybe from adverbs, some are from nouns, and at least one's from a postposition. So just to quickly exemplify how these work, here you can see the same verb to go, chew, being used with several different preverbs. So he chew is to go to, whereas kas chew is to go back, and op chew is to go here, whereas op chew is to return here. So very compositional, you can see exactly what they're doing in each of these uses. But there are plenty of lexicalized and non-compositional sentences or uses too. So kas ich is to sharpen something, but it literally means to like turn back over, and it probably refers to the act of turning a knife on a grinding stone. And then there's ni wokma, which the ni would normally make it intransitive, but it can be used with intransitives, transitives, and ditransitives. So it's not clear that any longer correlates to transitivity in this particular verb, whereas it clearly does in other uses of the verb. Moreover, you can actually see the same meaning kind of expressed both through preverbs and other grammatical uses in the language. So for example, this sentence, shen ni ku pi ni chui, is came to upon, but you see the to sense expressed both in the postposition who and in the preverb he. So it's in some, I won't call it double marking, but it seems pretty clear that he's not a postposition there, because who is already fulfilling that function. And likewise here, we've got the preverb kop with what is a perfect aspect verb. And kop tends to add what you would think of as an aspectual semantic verbs like stativity or coactivity or something like that. But it can occur with perfects, perfectives, imperfectives. It can occur with any type of aspect. So it itself is not necessarily an aspectual marker. So that's the Chitimacha preverbs. Why do we care about this? Well, I think it's really interesting to think about where this class of words came from, because it's this small class of 9 words. And if you just kind of think about it abstractly for a second, you can't necessarily just say it was by analogy, right? So where did these preverbs come from? Was there just like one preverb that kind of was like a really strong class of preverbs, and then all these other words were kind of brought into this category by analogy to that one? It seems kind of unlikely. And so obviously the first preverb too wouldn't have had anything to be analogous to. There were no preverbs in that class yet. So how did this come about? So my proposal, and this is research I'm just beginning, so this is still very much a work in progress, but my proposal is that simply by analogy to each other, it kind of taking advantage of what I like the term Marianne used at one point, what's known in construction grammar approaches to this as schematicity across different constructions. And so it's by analogy to these different words that this word class kind of emerged. So really briefly, and I'll skip over a lot of details here, show you where I think each of these preverbs came from, and then show you what I think commonality there was across all of them that kind of brought them into this schematicity that allowed this new class to emerge. So the first is the preverb ni, which pretty clearly just came from the word thing, and because of that became an intransitivizing preverb. So for example, you have chut to build something, and ni chut just to build. And then it also got used as a nominalizer in compounds. So you have sha ni shini po, rattlesnake medicine, but it's literally like snake medicine thing. This is kind of how that compound was formed. But this is kind of an interesting one too, because it also means down. And I have kind of no story for that, except for that there's other roots in the language that seem pretty clearly related to a sense of down. And so it might even be that there were kind of two separate roots that merged into this preverb, or are perhaps still separate preverbs, hard to say. But so this particular preverb both has this nominalizing thing history and this down history, maybe an adverb of some sort. Then you've got ach, which is here, or coming. And there is no verb in Chitimacha synchronically today, essentially. That means come. You have to say go here. So that suggests to me that this word might have actually been the original word for come. And then it took on this preverbal use through kind of a verb serialization construction. So you have apamachi, come and bring this. And that eventually became a preverbal use. It was reanalyzed as such. And maybe an adverbial function too, like go here. And then you have the reversive form of that. So instead of to come, it's to come back, right? So, and again, what's interesting here is that reversive is a verbal suffix. It's not something that goes on nouns or any other part of speech. It's clearly a verbal suffix. So it suggests a verbal origin in this preverb. And again, you can see a serial verb origin for that potentially. And then you can also see how the semantics of this, it has other uses. It can also mean about or randomly. So to go and come back, you can see how that eventually came to mean like to go about randomly, like you're just going all over the place. And same thing, like back together. It eventually came to be a reflexive and a reciprocal too. So you go, you come back, and you get that sense of back here together. And so there's, it seems like there's a potential semantic, pathway for how those meanings would have emerged. And then you have he, which might be related to the verb to be. I don't know if I want to propose that or not. But it seems pretty clear that it had its origins in a postposition meaning too. And originally it had constructions like this one, which is in the modern corpus, wa'an he teshi. And so it's wa'an he, a postpositional phrase, is I think what this construction originally was. It was originally a postposition. And then the he was reanalyzed as being a preverb eventually. But now, like we saw earlier, you can see it co-occur with postpositions. So it no longer has that postpositional use. But many examples of it in the corpus still look very postpositional. It seems to almost add an object to the verb at times. And then you have the reversive form of that he's, which is back to or undoing, redoing, in response. So same thing, it's the he plus the reversive. So to go back and do something. And you can see how that's kind of semantically changed over time to go back and do it again. And that's where the semantics of redoing would come from. And then you have kap, which I'm fairly certain came from a historic root meaning to go up. I've seen it in a couple other words historically where you can analyze the morphemes in it. And so that eventually became an inceptive and an encodative. So you can see kind of a pathway for the meaning of this changing for like to go up in verb, like to up in verb suddenly. And then to up and become verbs, you have that inceptive use or an encodative use, and then eventually a stative use, something that becomes something is statively is verb. So, and then its reversive form. Now this is interesting because it only occurs 7 times in the corpus, whereas in most of these other preverbs it's very frequent. But this one's pretty rare, and it means returning back up, like going up again. And sure enough, it always occurs to things like all 7 of these are pretty much like they rose up from the dead again. So, but because of that, they're still very adverb-like in their usage. Even though this is, in its morphological form and its phonotactic form, looks very much like a verb group. So it's kind of hard to know, it might have been adverb, maybe the adverbs themselves have. I should mention, by the way, that Chitimacha has no strong class of adverbs synchronically. everything that's an adverb can very clearly be broken down into historical and final something. And then you've got cons, returning there, or reverse, or apart. And it seems pretty clear that this has the reversative, s or sh at the end of it. And there's good evidence from other verbs that there used to be this root kat to extend across. But I hadn't actually seen anything in the corpus of a kat without the s. And I was like, well, that's weird. And then I went and looked, and sure enough, it was there. It was a hapaxagomena. It occurred one time in the corpus, and up until I thought about this, I had no idea what it was doing. And then sure enough, I looked at it in context, and it seems to make sense as a preverb that it means something like across. So wekimushneu nesh, which is the branch, bringing the branch out of the water across to the land. So that was exciting. I thought that was kind of a cool little discovery there. All right, so what's common about all of these constructions? What could have possibly given rise to this new class of preverbs from all these strange different backgrounds to these words? Well, syntactically, if you look at all of them, you have an adverb verb, you have a subordinate and a main verb, or a medial and final verb. You have a postpositional phrase and verb, and a nominal object and a verb. So in each case, syntactically, basically what you had is these things were all in preverbal position. And so syntactically, it would have been easy to see them reanalyzed as being part of the verbal unit rather than whatever the rest of the sentence. But at the same time, it's important to have a semantic commonality too that drew them together. And sure enough, it's not always clear which of the meanings of these words is the most original. If some of them have a more directional meaning, or if the directional meanings were derivative. But the point is that all of them at some point developed or had some sort of directional or locative meaning. So the semantic unity in this class wound up being directional. And so it was this confluence of, and of course other things probably came into this as well. Frequency probably had a huge effect. So the confluence of these different properties kind of gave rise to what I think was kind of a paradigmicity or schematicity across these different constructions. And so it was by analogy to each other that all these preverbs eventually became, or all these words became kind of into this new class of preverbs.